On Dafayin Hamid Bays, so we talk about a person who had an injury, V'chazre Silva, B'beitzin. So a coats made a hole in his beitzin. And yet, V'nafak minei, and moreover, I should say, not and yet, and moreover, nafak minei kechutim mugla, right? He had mugla, which is lecha, that came out. And nevertheless, Olid, he had children. So you see that even though Nikev Beitzov, he still is capable of having children. So the Gemara answers, Hasholach Shmuel Lekami to Rav. Shmuel actually sent this question to Rav. The Omer Le, and Rav said in response to the question of Shmuel, Chazer al Banov may ayin. It's impossible that he could have had children. And if his wife gave birth, she must have had a relationship with another man, which means that the child is a mamzer. So check out and find out if this woman had a relationship with another man. And the other man is the father of this child, because her husband could not possibly be the father of this child if he had a nikev bebeitzim, if nikvo kotes bebeitzim. Now, the Yehuda has a gewaldige chiddush, and I mentioned to it because it's very, very relevant. Halacha l'maisa, I know of a friend of mine to whom this Noda Yehuda was a lifesaver. The Noda Yehuda asked the following kasha: why did Shmuel wait until this man who had the injury fell onto a palm tree and he went back to his wife to resume his relationship, and then they had a child? Why didn't Shmuel ask the question about the man himself? Forget about, is he allowed to live with his wife? And why did Shmuel allow him to live with his wife? He should have immediately said, separate from your wife, send the question to Rav, find out if he's allowed to stay married. And yet Shmuel waited until they had a child. So now the Yehuda concludes from this story that if he had one beitza achas, meaning the injury was only to one testicle and he has another testicle, then mutar lava b'kol. But even if he's not capable of being molid, he's not technically a p'tzuadaka, because only one beitza was nikeh. Let's say, for example, he had a very high fever. Rashi indicates ra'amim ubarad. Mipachad ra'amim ubarad. That's how some interpret Rashi. O shepagu bo v'lachein asis saris. Whoa. He got hit by a bolt of lightning, and he became a saris. That's called bidei shamayim, and he's not a p'tuadaki, it's kachalav b'kol. So it's got to be the human intervention, an actual, incision. Amar Rava Hainu de Karinon. Now I can understand the pasuk. It says lo yavo p'tsua daka lo karinon hapatua. If it would have said hapatsua, I would interpret to mean that he was already patsua from birth. But from the Torah, using the word pitsua, the meaning of the Torah is nifta. He had an injury after he was born. But if he was patsua b'meme imo, then he's kosher. So again, you can have two people have the exact same urological phenomenon. One is a p'tuadaka, is also level kol. The other is mutar. One was born that way, he's mutar. The other one had some sort of an incision. Now, when I say incision, I don't think it means that you have to have someone standing there with a knife cutting off his testicles. We had the case where he fell off a tree But once again, there was an injury. He wasn't born that way. The only thing is, you'll ask me, what's the difference between getting hit by falling off onto a tree and the case of getting hit by thunder, by lightning, according to those mefarshim. Therefore, we're more tempted to think that thunder and lightning created a pachad, and as a result, it became sterile. Alternatively, maybe it means when a person falls off a tree, it's like he's injuring himself by the impact onto the coats, as opposed to the case where, the lightning struck from Shamayim. I don't know. Masechet Tana, the Gemara now quotes a brisa for further proof to establish this distinction between P'tuadak B'dei Shamayim and a P'tuadakus Pasul. Nemar, it says Lo Yavo P'tsua Daka. V'nemar Lo Yavo Mamzer. So we have a Gzeir Shava Lo Yavo Ba'alahal, just like by Mamzer B'dei Adam, right? There was a Maises Nus, or a violation of a Chiyuv Kares, but that's all B'dei Adam. Afkan P'tuadaka means that the injury was B'dei Adam, but not B'dei Shamayim. B'dei Shamayim is kosher. Like if he was born that way, or some natural event happened. Amar Rava, the pasuk says, "Lo yava p'tuadaka krus shavcha b'kal Hashem p'tsua b'kulon," and then it says daka, which means dach, which means nimach, right, crushed, b'kulon. Karus says krus shavcha b'kulon. What does that mean? What is b'kulon? And now the Gemara goes through it one by one. P'tsua b'kulon means bein shenifta hagid, bein sheniftu beitzim. So whether or not the organ was injured or the testicles were injured, bein sheniftu chutei beitzim. So inside the scrotum, there's something called chutim, that kind of like pathways or what would you call it? Anyway, there's something that brings the zera from one place to the other, so that it goes from the testicles up to the organ. Dach b'kulon, or it was crushed, not cut but crushed. Bein shenidach hagid, bein shenidchu beitzim, bein shenidchu chutei beitzim. Karus, where there's crushed. B'kulon, bein shenichras hagid, bein shenichrasu beitzim, bein shenichrasu chutei beitzim. Amaleya humir upon l'rava. Mimai, how do you know? The hype to a daka be oso mokom. Right, he had an injury, but it doesn't say in the Torah where, in what part of the body he had an injury. How do you know it's in the genital area? Ema Rosho, maybe he had an injury in his head. Amalei midalo mana ein beidoros. And all the other psulim, we'll give a few examples. It always mentions the generations to come. Like for example, by Mamzer, it says Lo Yovo Mamzer b'kal Hashem gam dora siri. By Amonu Moav, it says Lo Yovo Amoni Movi gam dora siri lo yovo lehem. And with regard to Mitri, it says Dor Shlishi yovo lehem. But in the case of P'tuadaka, the Torah did not say anything about Banav or B'nei Beso, anything about the generations. Shma Minah, the Oso Mokum, must be that the injury happened in that place, and therefore he's not capable of having children, and there are no Doros. The Gemara still insists, but Dilma perhaps, Hi to lo monabo Doros, the Iu, the Osa, Breu, Bar, Brei, Kosher. Maybe the Torah wanted to say that although the P'tuadaka, the father, is not allowed to come to Kol, but his children are allowed to come to Kol. And the Gemara says that's impossible. You cannot assume that P'tuadaka means that he got hit over the head. Because Dumya de Krus Shavcha, in the same pasuk It says lo yavav to adaku krushavcha. Ma krushavcha bioso mokom af hai nami bioso mokom. So Gemara asks krushavcha gufe mimai bioso mokom hu. How do we know that he was crushed in that place, in the genital area? Ema misifse. Maybe he had some sort of an injury to his lips, and he's a krushavcha. Means shavcha is misham shofech harok. That's where the saliva comes rolling down. So when it answers shavcha ksiv b'makom sheshofech. Now again, if you have saliva and it comes out, but it's not what you call a shficha. He spits out the roke, and it could land who knows how far away. But we're talking about a place be also makom hu shofech, and therefore must be referring to also makom the aim of a perhaps chotmo, maybe the what's it called, the mucus, I guess we'll call it, of his nose is dribbling down from his nose, and he got an injury to his nose. So Gemara says mit ksiv bashafoch krus, which means b'makom sheragil lishpo. That's where he had the krisa, which is in his nose. It says shavcha ksiv mishal yidei krisa shofech. In other words, what's happening now is that these things are coming down, these liquids and so forth, because of the krisa, because of some sort of crushing impact. In the case of the nose, Shalal Yadei Krisa, it would still be shofech. But at this point, the Gemara differentiates between flowing and spurting. Shofech, Shalal Yadei Krisa, Eino Shofech Ela Mekalech. In other words, what happened was that before the injury, it was mekalech. Mekalech means it spurts with a certain energy, but as a result of the krisa, it stops spurting and it sort of dribbles down. That's called shofech. Lafuki high, but that has nothing to do with an injury to the nose. To idi ve'idi shofechu. Even before he got hit on the nose, the mucus in his nose, we call it snot. I hate to use that word because it's a slang word, but that just drips down. You don't spurt it out. We have a brisa that's going to establish how we know that it's an injury. So never lo yavav p'tua dak, never lo yavav mamzer. Again, we have the Xer Shav lo yavav malahal, just like in the case of a mamzer. Is bioso moko. What brought about his mamzerus? He was born from a bia in the genital area. Afkan, so to dak is bioso moko. Okay. Now this next piece of Gemara, unless somebody, I asked somebody to send me. Just 1 second. Just see. I just want to turn on my phone because earlier this morning, when I learned this piece of Gemara that we're about to learn, I wrote a note to a friend of mine, asking him if he could send me a copy of the art scroll, the English translation. I don't have access to the art scroll. In any event, as far as the gid is concerned, which is the penis itself, in the high point, it's called, meaning away from the body, there is something that goes around and around. We call it a corona. It's called in Hebrew an atara. Now, below the atara, going down towards, let's say, the floor and the bottom of the gid, that's called basar. Okay, I see he didn't send it to me. He probably didn't get the message either. Okay. So the Mishnah says that if the basar of the atara was crushed, he's not possible. We'll see later on there has to be a chut left over, which is called a chut hasara me'atara al pnei hekefa. So if there was, let's say, a nikev habasar, there was a hole that penetrated into the corona, he would not become possible. But if there was a hole in the penis itself, the gid, what we call, then he becomes possible. And now the Gemara is going to qualify that. Nikev lamata me'atara, shekenegdo lamala me'atara. So we have a case of a nekev mishfulash that goes from one side to the other. The hole goes from one side to the other. But one end of this hole is lamata me'atara, meaning it's below the crown, it's towards the ground. I guess you'd call it towards the base, maybe. Now the nekev goes like diagonally through his gid until it reaches the top of the gid. And shekenegdo, so that the end of the hole going up is lamala me'atara. Is Sav Rab Chia bar Abba lachshure. Rabbi Chia thought that maybe in this case the Bala Nekev is kosher lava b'kol, because the two ends of the Nekev are not above the Atara. Only one end of the Nekev on going out is above the Atara. However, Omole Rav Asi, Hachi Omer Rav Yeshua ben Levi, Atara kolshi makeves. If there's a Nekev, al pnei ha'Torah, then even if the nekev is only going towards the width of the Torah, kol shehi makeves, which means that chetzio ha'Torah makeves es efsharuso milaholi v'chein posel milav l'kol. So again, the key, we have to get a real diagram of this, but the main point there is that according to the Maskanas HaGemara, if the nekev goes al kol pnei ha'Torah, afilu nekev berochav kol shehi ma'keves. So that's the biology that we have to really try to clarify. We'll try to read a little bit more of the Gemara for the next 2 or 3 minutes. And then we'll try to finish this up later on. Hopefully by then, in the afternoon today, I'll have some sort of an English translation that would help me understand the biology. It's amazing how detailed the Gemara goes into. Anyway, the Mishnah says that there's a krut shivchos posel called nichras hagid v'nishtayr me'atorah afil kechut asara kosher. So something left over from the corona, from the crown. Yosef Ravina v'kami boile, he vacillated. What does it mean, kechut asara, that was left over? Milo hachut. That means that there's a chut left over from the atar that surrounds the entire organ, and then he's kosher, or perhaps even if it doesn't go around the entire width of the corona, but it only goes al pnei ruba, that's enough to maintain his kashrus. He's not considered a krushivcha. Amalei Rava Tosefta l'Ravino Malo achut pnei ruba klape reisha. So Malo achut al pnei kula means nishtayim me'atorah al pnei ruba shel hekef agid. That's only, says Rava Dafka imalo achut nishtayim me'atorah klape reisha. It's towards the top of the atorah. Avolim chelek hatorah samach legid. Nechtav berubo. Areu krushivcha. Afilu nishar me'atorah kol hekef agid b'tzida hamaruchak migid v'samach lekarka. So it sounds to me, and again, I hope I'll be able to clarify this better, that we're talking about the Atorah and we're like sort of dissecting its parts. There's part of the Atorah which is Samach Legid, and then there's the Rosh HaTorah, which is called in the Gemara's language Reisha. So if the Malo Chutz and Ishtayr is Kape Reisha, which is towards the Rosh HaTorah, is then what? Then he's kosher. Aval im chelek haTorah hasamach legid nechtat rubo. And we're talking about that part of the Torah which is towards the bottom, I guess, towards the gid itself. Then, even though he's left with a miut, that's not enough. He's still a krushivcha. So rov and miut will be helpful on the reisha, but not towards the chelek hagid hasamach legid. And therefore, the final conclusion is afilu nishar me'atorah kol hekef agid b'tzida maruchak me'agid b'samach lekarka. All right, so this last Gemara we'll have to try to revisit it and take this opportunity to wish you a very good day.